And we're recording. Harlow is an all-in-one freelance tool as well as a community. Our goal is to just help freelancers grow thriving businesses. So we also have with us today Samantha, my co-founder, who is on mute because she is sick and not well today. And then we also have Maddie, our wonderful community manager, who a lot of you are probably familiar with. So before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping items. I know a lot of people couldn't join us today, so this session will be recorded. If there's somebody that you want to send this over to, we'll send over a link to the recording afterwards. It'll be on YouTube as well as on our website. Today is going to be a 45-minute session on mastering mindfulness and prioritizing your well-being with the amazing Jenni Gritters. We're so excited to have you with us today. And we've got a handful of questions that were sent over to us beforehand that we'll go ahead and start with. But if you have any questions during the Q&A, just please drop them in the chat, or you can just like raise your hand. I think there's a little raise hand icon. We'll call on you and we'll let you chime in. So you're welcome to participate in any way that feels comfortable and good to you. So before we get to the questions, Jenni, would you mind giving a quick intro and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Andrea. So my name is Jenni Gritters, and I am a business coach for freelancers and creative entrepreneurs. So most of my clients are individual workers. So most people are solopreneurs. A lot of them are freelancers. And I'm also a freelance writer and editor. My background is as a journalist. That's how I started my career over a decade ago. Things have changed a lot, but I still do a lot of writing. And I also live in Central Oregon with two tiny children. My kids are almost a year old and 3.5. So my life is very full. I work mostly part-time, like 3/4 time, depending on the week. And I have a background as a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher as well. So you're going to hear all these things kind of married together, I think, in the way that we talk about running a business today. My focus on running a business is really teaching people how to run sustainable businesses that work through seasons of your life that are challenging, difficult, complex. We all end up dealing with those at times, and sort of prioritizing your life over your business, and having a relationship between your life and work that feels really good. So that is, I think, a super perfect fit for the topic today. And at the end, I'll share more resources and things about how you can, work with me in the future. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. I feel like you kind of touched on this a little bit, but our first question for you, which you did touch on in the Harlow interview series you did for us, is really just like, what does mindfulness mean to you, and why is it so important? If you could just expand on that one a little bit.
Of course, that's a great question. So when I think of mindfulness, I think of being present, like literally noticing what's going on, being mindful. And I would say that that's very counter to the way our culture teaches you to work. The hustle mindset is pretty opposite from being mindful. You're going, you're moving really fast. You're often not checking in. And to me, running a sustainable business is about actually checking in, being present. Also having a lovely life is about experiencing the present moment. So to me, when I say mindfulness, I kind of think of being here and now. And when I teach my clients to be more mindful about their businesses, they're also able to be more intentional about what they're building. So mindfulness sounds like this like woo-woo word, I think, but for a lot of my clients and for me, it's a weekly check-in of how things are going, how I feel in my body. Is this working? What needs to change? It's having moments where you're touching down on earth instead of just speeding along. And it's a different approach to running a business. Frankly, it's not what we're taught in school. It's not what you would learn at a university. I mean, it's really counter, but as a person who has a lot going on in my life, I have mental health challenges. I have a panic disorder. I have 2 young kids. I can't move at that pace and not check in, or I end up kind of like in a corner where things are really compressive and I feel like I'm not doing the type of work I want to be doing. So when I say mindfulness, that's what I mean. It's sort of that check-in, that awareness.
Yeah.
What the heck is going on?
It's
instead of being in the trees.
It's what we learn in our first jobs also, right? It's just like, be reactive. Oh, your boss needs something, get it to him immediately. And I know I personally like carried this mentality with me into freelancing of, oh my gosh, the client needs something. They're gonna think I'm terrible if I don't respond right away, if I'm not like on Slack 24/7, all of that. For me, it was really hard to let that go and put in place some boundaries. What inspired you to really focus on this in your coaching practice, as well as just in your own business?
Doing the opposite. My very first job was at a viral media company, and I was working probably 3 people's jobs in one person's body. I was that person that you could go to and ask questions, and I would know the answers. I would get it done really fast. So much of my identity was really built around reactivity, I think.
Yeah.
And it fried me. So I worked at that job for 2 years, and I left without a job to step into because I literally could not keep going. I mean, like, my mental health was suffering. My body didn't feel good. I was on a laptop for 12 hours a day. And so that was 8 years ago. I would say it's been a very slow evolution. And I still, when I'm stressed, will step back into that reactive space, frankly. But it's been a slow evolution over time to sort of dismantle some of that. Like, am I still going to have good work? Am I still going to have clients if I slow down a little, if I ask these questions, if I make decisions that are good for me? And so it's totally personal. But then as my life has gotten more complex, it's almost become like, I don't have a choice anymore. I do have to use these tools. And frankly, I get a lot of people in my coaching practice who have the same story. They're burnt out. They feel like they're running a business that's not exactly aligned with their needs, and they can't figure out how to switch it. And so I started teaching this over and over again, and eventually realized, I think it's a thing that happens about 2 to 3 years in for most people in a freelance business, where what has gotten you here, the reactivity, the being always available, isn't long-term sustainable for most people.
Yeah. How do you incorporate like mindfulness into your routine and into your business?
So I have a lot of touch points, is what I would call them. I'm really like not a lover of habits because those are very rigid in most people's minds. Every day I wake up and do the same thing. I'm not the same person with the same needs every day. My children don't wake up at the same time every day. For me, having those very regular, like, concrete practices actually doesn't work. So I have rituals or touch points. I do a lot of walking. That is one of the things for me that's very mindful. It gets me back in my body, and I get my best business ideas when I'm moving. So to me, that's a mindfulness ritual that I have. Sunday evenings, I do sit down and reflect on what I need to do for the week ahead. That is also a mindful ritual because I'm not just planning my days based on my inbox, which is so easy to do. I'm actually figuring out what is the most meaningful work I can be doing. So those 2 things, and then little things. I like stand up and try to take a deep breath every hour, sometimes I need to like shake out my body because I've been holding it weird because I've been on Zoom. So just those little noticings. And I do a yoga nidra meditation every night before bed so I can slow my brain down. So those are my touch points. When I'm working with people, that's what we talk about. Like, okay, what are your both feet back on the ground touch points like throughout the week? Like, and those will be different for everybody. I think like we don't all need to have a fancy morning routine. For a lot of people, that actually is not doable to wake up at 6 a.m. and meditate and drink warm water and do yoga. For some,
I wish.
Yeah, I wish, but it's actually more frustrating than helpful oftentimes when we try to slot ourselves into these like predetermined ideas of what would be good for us, because it's so individual about what feels good to you and what slows you down.
Do you have any recommendations for people in terms of like implementing some mindfulness techniques to help them in terms of managing their clients in that dynamic?
Yeah, this is where the reactive to intentional shows up in your business. So the way I see this showing up most often for people is you get offered an assignment and you say yes right away. It's reactive. And that's because that is how you have probably run your business to start. It's like survival, right? And so the way that we start working in that mindful pause is taking a moment between the email that says, do you want to do this work, and your response. There's a Viktor Frankl quote. You will hear me say this to you. We will read it in my newsletter if you work with me. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is where there's freedom. And so we're not robots. Things don't just happen and we respond. There is a moment. And so that moment between the project offer and the yes or no is where you start to get a little more control. And what I usually do with people is we figure out a little checklist of questions to ask during that pause. So you train yourself to turn off your email, to step away, or to put your email on pause, or you have a canned email that says to the person, I'll get back to you in 24 hours. You go for a walk, then you come back and there's these questions you ask. Is this project aligned for me right now? Is the pay right? Do I want to do this? What would be the cost of doing this? So you start to sort of interrogate. That's the mindfulness, right? If whether or not this is working for you. That's one of my favorite. I think that's like the first little step that I have people take towards moving towards being a little more mindful and intentional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maddie, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was going to say, I absolutely love that advice. I am a person, like, I'm a yes girl. I say yes to everything very fast. And that's kind of always been something that I do. And I've noticed, especially in friendships and like personal relationships, I'll sign myself up for something, even if I don't want to do it. And then I just dread it. So I think that advice like resonates to so many different areas of your life, right? Take some time, step away and really think like, do I want to do this for real? Or am I just saying yes, because I think that that's what's expected of me?
Yeah, because it's safe to say yes too, right? I mean, I think for a lot of us, that's been our training. Me too. Like, I didn't grow up in a family where you would really say no. And it seemed like there were consequences to saying no. So it is sort of training your nervous system, like in little ways with friends, things like that. So you feel safe. Also, then you don't have to cancel last minute after dreading it for 5 days, right?
Right. Or go and like be in that mindset that you've been dreading it for so long that there's no way you're going to have fun. And you're also going to kill the vibe for everyone else because you're already in that negative headspace.
Yep, exactly. And that's what happens with clients too, right? This dread, the drag of the dread means projects take you longer. You're not making as much money. Your business starts to slow down. I mean, like, it's also a bad business decision to say yes to things that are misaligned. And burnout is because of misalignment. Burnout isn't just because you're working too hard. It's because there's like your value system and what feels good to you. And then you're doing something that is not aligned with that. And it erodes and starts to feel really horrible. Your nervous system doesn't feel good. So it's like, I always tell this to people, like, it's not selfish. It's like actually better for everyone involved, like you said, because also there's other freelancers out there who might love that project. Even if it's not right for you. But it is a tough switch to make. Saying no is really hard for most of us. So it's like the little baby steps to get towards that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely have more of a scarcity mindset when it comes to freelancing. Like, oh, I'm so scared that the next thing isn't going to come along, especially in this market right now. So like, how do you stay true? How do you stay true to yourself when you know I should do this, but I'm terrified?
Yeah, you figure it out and tell me. I mean, my best advice is this. Sometimes you do make the decision and you feel really good. And then sometimes it feels safer to take the thing anyway. And it's a both and. But I think one of the exercises I've been working with lately with clients is abundance is like a very squishy word, right? Scarcity is the idea that there's like not enough. Abundance is the idea that there's endless everything. And so we've started to work on noticing abundance in other parts of your life, because scarcity is a very capitalist thing. It's ingrained in our entire way of being. And so your brain is not trained to even like have an awareness of there being enough. That's not normal in terms of the way we live. And so starting to notice it, like, oh, look how many trees there are. Wow, there's enough air to breathe. Like those basic things starts to switch your brain just a little bit. And then you you also take those small risks, right? You're not saying no to the $2,000 thing. You're saying no to the $500 thing, and you start to get more used to it. But it's really a complicated cocktail. This is why coaching is great, because we sit for an hour and dissect what your brain thinks is going to happen and whether or not it's true and what you would do if it happened. Like walk down the road a little so you feel like you have a fallback plan too. It's that as well.
How has practicing mindfulness changed your business?
This is such a good question. So when my son was born, he was born 3 months before the pandemic started. And I had a really rough pregnancy. I had PTSD after he was born. He was in the NICU. It was like really genuinely horrible. And I couldn't go back to work in the same way, unsurprisingly. And it was also the pandemic, which was bizarre in and of itself. And the more I did internal work and the more I practiced presence, the more I realized I had to change my business model. And so I did. I worked for 15 hours a week for pretty much the entire first year and a half of his life. And I still made enough money. It was wild because I had to make these really intentional choices about who to work with and who not to work with. So I think it's this like awareness of the season that you're in and then adjusting your business to match that has changed my business structure over and over again. I just did this last year. I left the company I was running with Wu Dan Yan, and again, like changed my business structure to accommodate the needs of my family and myself. So the result for me has been frequent pivots, which is complex, but also that's the benefit of running a business is you have that choice. You have that ability. And so it's, do I need to turn up the volume? Do I need to turn down the volume? Do I need different clients to meet these financial needs? It's like those little practical questions that adjusts my schedule, my client load, the work I'm doing based on the capacity I have in my brain. I do a lot more coaching now because that's the season I'm in, right? But that may not always be true.
Are those kind of small decisions and pivots? Are those happening in real time as you're running your business, or do you actually like kind of schedule these reflective periods where you actually like kind of analyze what's been going on and what you need?
I do a lot of reflection because otherwise I don't notice necessarily. Like I will feel sort of dread and like frustration, but I won't know what actively I need to do to fix that unless I sit down. So I have a very, if you follow my newsletter, I'll drop the link in at the end, but I wrote a newsletter about creative business planning. And about once a month, I sit down offline, no computer, no phone. There's a bookshop in my town that has an attic. So I go sit in the attic with like colored pencils and I sit there and I ask myself these questions. What is working? What's not working? I audit my clients. I figure out what my capacity needs to be, like, how many hours do I actually have? What's my brain feeling like? And then based on that, I'll make a little to-do list of things to tweak. Because I don't think it's possible to make these changes when you're in the forest. Like you need to be like stepped back a little to see what's going on. And this is what I do in coaching too. So when people come in and do business audits, that's what we're doing. We're asking what's working, what's not. And then we tweak little tweaks about once a month.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about boundaries and what boundaries you've set up with clients to kind of help you, and how you use those boundaries to protect your own well-being.
Yeah, boundaries are hard for most of us, I think. And we often think of them as brick walls and none shall pass. And then somebody tries to, and we get really angry. The way I like to think about boundaries is that it's kind of a negotiation. So you're going to put your needs on the table, your client's going to put their needs on the table, and then you're going to figure out what works for you. So I do have boundaries around availability. So I am not available in the evenings to my clients. I say I'm available Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from 10 to 3. And that's when I'm going to get emails from them. And that's when I might be able to respond. And otherwise I have 24 hours lag time, basically. That's in all my emails. So that's a clear boundary that I have because I have small children and they are with me on Thursdays and Fridays most of the time. So that's important to me. But again, like sometimes there's clients who have needs outside of those hours, and I'll work with them to figure out how to accommodate those needs without taking something from myself, basically. So that's important to me. I really like to work with people who are kind. And so I will sometimes say no to projects or working in a coaching relationship if someone is abrasive or, makes me feel not great. Like I try to protect my emotional well-being in that way. And then I have a lot of boundaries in the workplace around like how many rounds of edits do clients get. That's all showing up in the contract. So when are you going to pay me? How are you going to pay me? What's the length of this project? Like there's some very specific guidelines that I have with my clients to make sure that I am protected, that we have similar expectations for what's going in. And again, like I'm offering what I need, they're asking for what they need. And we're sort of creating a tapestry of needs in a contract. So that feels important to me too, that's why contracts matter, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We put a lot of things in our contract around that. And Samantha is always very good at creating boundaries around communication as well. Like I'm not going to respond. We're not going to join your Slack room. We can have a dedicated Slack channel, but we're not going into your company Slack because it's just, we would never get our project done. We'd just be reacting.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't do like when I step in, sometimes I'll edit for 3 months for a client. I'm not attending meetings. I don't want to be involved in the company. Whatever's going on, I'm like a hired hand. I'm going to come in, I'm going to do the thing and I'm going to leave. Right. So those are the questions again, that like when you take that pause between the offer and the yes, like sometimes the answer is maybe if and that's this list. Maybe if I could do this project in 2 months and I had 3 weeks to do it and you were paying me this and the communication was XYZ, then it would work for me. And that's what you pitch back to them. So it is part of that. I call it your business rule book. Most of my clients will like create a little business rule book that they have on a sticky note in their computer or whatever, so that when they get in those moments, they're like reminded of, oh, those are the things that are important to me, so that this project feels really good. And not every project does, but most of them do with that intentionality in place.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good idea to just write it down. Sam has a question.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about Andrea and I's previous experiences. And for us, toward probably in the second and third year of our freelancing career was when we started including a lot of those boundaries in our contracts and actually putting them in writing. But for us, we really had to go through some mishaps to get to the point where we started including those things, right? It was like a learning experience. Okay, in the next contract, we're going to include this. A learning experience, in the next contract, we're going to include this. So I was just wondering if that's, what happened to you. Did you kind of have to experience a mishap and then set a boundary, experience a mishap, then set a boundary? Or did you think through your boundaries very clearly, from the early stages?
Oh no, I only learned them from them being stepped on. And then I felt angry, right? Because when you're angry, it's because the need hasn't been met. And so that's a sign that that's a boundary you probably want to set with a future client. I'm thinking about I had 2 or 3 clients right when I started freelancing who were just the worst fit for me. I mean, everything they were asking me to do, the way they were communicating with me, all the things, it was just not good. And I made a lot of money from those projects, but it wasn't ultimately a fit. So I think you're exactly right. The only way to learn it is through not getting it and then realizing you need it. And that is most of the people who come into my coaching room around 2 to 3 years. That's why this is the conversation that we're having, right? What got you here doesn't get you there. And at 2 to 3 years, you have enough confidence, usually, that the process, there are clients out there who are going to meet your needs, that you're willing to start setting some of those lines in the sand, if you will, with who you're going to work with and who you're not going to work with.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for freelancers that are at that exact point, right? They've hit this mark of okay, I know I can be successful, but man, this isn't sustainable. Where do you start?
Yeah. I'm actually running a coaching group this fall for this exact group of people because I have a long wait list and most of them are in this space. So the group will be called Sustain. If you follow me, you'll see information about it. It's a monthly program. But I start with asking some of those big questions about what you want, because usually what you want has changed 2 to 3 years in. What you wanted at the beginning was to run your own business, and you did it because now you're 3 years in. However, now it's not enough. that was survival. And so what's next? And so we're asking some of those bigger questions. What do you want? What do you care about? What do you value? What feels good? What are you excited about? Like some of it is that self-interrogation, again, like mindful awareness. And then we're building those thoughts and needs into your business. So the question is like, okay, which of these clients meet those values? Okay, this one doesn't. So we're going to make a little game plan on how to pull them out and recruit a new client. So usually in this phase, there's a need to find new clients because the clients who worked for you don't work for you anymore based on pricing and the way they treat you. There's a need for like a different business infrastructure usually that like in terms of your schedule, in terms of the way you're invoicing, things like that, because you've sort of been making it work and now you need something that's going to work for like 10 years. And then we do a lot of like planning, what's going to happen in 6 months, 9 months, what big projects are on your radar and how do you start picking at them? This is when people start touching on some of those ambitious creative projects, usually books, something they want in their portfolio that they don't have. So there's a lot of stuff in this. Is why I'm going to do a group on it. And every month we'll have a different theme because there's also a lot of money stuff that comes up at this point too, in terms of rates, pricing, confidence, I want to make more money. How do I do that? All of that is wrapped up in getting your needs met while also hitting the financial things. So it's very like multi-pronged, I think. I could talk about it for a year, which is why it needs to be a program. But most people hit this point 2 to 3 years in. It's almost everybody I know. They do.
Yeah. Sam?
One, I love that you're running that group and that it's called Sustain. It's just like a really, really beautiful. And I remember hitting all of those exact same pain points in our business. Can you talk to us a little bit, outside of that group who kind of hits these pain points at year 2 or 3, where else are kind of like your sweet spots for coaching and helping people bring mindfulness in? Are there other like specific, moments in the journey for freelancers and small business owners that like they could really benefit from coaching? What does that look like?
Yeah. So the 2 programs I'm launching this fall, one is Sustain, and then one is a program called Build. And the idea is that most of us just kind of go flailing into starting a freelance business and like it works, but also then you hit 3 years in and you're like, I really need to change something. So the Build program is oriented to doing a lot of this stuff at the outset. So not just building a business and figuring out your services, but also figuring out how to build a life adjacent to your work and having those things be married together. So it's a 4-week program. It's one-on-one coaching. So I find there's a lot of benefit in setting yourself up for these things like right away. And a lot of us didn't have that ability, but because so many people are getting laid off, I'm getting requests for this all the time. But it's really important to me that it's not just business 101. It's also mindful awareness of what you care about and building something that will last. So that's happening. I do a lot of business audits with people as well throughout, and often those are annual. And I think that's a really good moment to get somebody else's subjective brain in the picture, because working alone is really hard and you get a little bit like tunnely. And so having someone else just look at your business structure once a year and talk with you about what you want and need is like wonderful, worth every penny. So I do a lot of that annually with people. And then I do have a small subset of people who have hit the like 5-6 year mark who are scaling up into agencies or adjusting their business models to, in a variety of ways, build passive revenue streams, kind of do things that are more, I would call it scaling. And so that is a point that people usually hit. That's a little variable. It's somewhere between 5 and 10 years in where they just kind of actually want a different career, frankly, like they want the size and shape to be different. And that is also where you need a lot of coaching, because that level up is big in terms of money, hiring help. I'm actually in the midst of doing that in my business. And so I've been doing a ton of coaching because you need someone else to help you feel grounded as you're making those shifts. So Dan and I used to call these inflection points in our podcast. It's those moments where something needs to change, but you're not exactly sure how to change it. And you need a partner, like a thought partner, to sort of help you figure out how to jump over that little liminal space.
I love that so much, because you can get so in the weeds of your own business, right? It's so hard to take a step back, even when you're making the time to reflect, right? Even when you're, going up into your attic space and bringing your colored pencils and being really thoughtful about, assessing your business, it can be really hard to do that on your own and think bigger without having someone there to challenge you and, ask the right questions. So I think that's great. I think the annual review would be really beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, you get that in a full-time job, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, you get a point to reflect and say, I grew these skills and I'm proud of this, and this thing was hard, and this is what I want to do next year. And so that is kind of what this is. I think that's the hardest part about freelancing, is the lack of structure in terms of advancement. And so that is the role I play for a lot of people, right? Like, you don't have a manager anymore. I've worked as a manager in full-time jobs. I was always running teams. There's a similarity there in terms of the reflective sort of like somebody else who's not in your brain thing that just is it's so good. It's so important. It's why I love doing this too. Watching people's businesses like jump is really fun, frankly.
I love that. I mean, there's a handful of people here, right? And I think when you start talking about mindfulness and reflecting on your business and doing these assessments, it can feel really overwhelming. And so if you had to, talk to everyone here and just give them advice on just like, what is like the simplest way to start dipping your toe into like being more thoughtful with your business?
That's a great question. The simplest way is to like pause in the middle of the day and notice how your body feels. Like close your eyes for 5 seconds, because our brains have about 20% of the information, our bodies have about 80. And so oftentimes, like, even if mentally you're not noticing because there's an inertia, right? That's happening. Like, you're just going, your brain is not really tuned into that. Your body will have some sort of tell if things don't feel very good. For a lot of us, it's like, I will keep my shoulders here and it will protect me, right? Or like, you're not super breathing. Your stomach feels a little weird. So that is like a very basic way to just start noticing like what's happening. And that's my question, is really what's happening, right? Like, how would you put that into a sentence? What's happening right now? That's it. That's like the small version of the big question. And then, yeah, like you get into like sitting down for 45 minutes and asking what's working, what's not working, what do I love, what do I hate, what am I dreading? Some of those questions, but really like, what's happening right now? Is it? Yeah.
I love that. I think I have those moments often where I'm like, oh my God, why do I feel like if I don't stretch right now, my body's going to absolutely snap? Oh, it's because I've been sitting in this stressed pose for so long because I can't actually solve this problem right now. So I need to step away.
Yeah. But there's inertia that makes that actually quite difficult. So it's like this training thing that we have to train ourselves to do, to like take a second, like, woo, because it will be like, it's 2 p.m. I haven't eaten lunch. My shoulder is up at my ear. Like, I feel really bad in my body. Oh, I should probably take a walk. So it's that's the tiny thing. That's the first tiny thing.
I love that.
Love that too. I know we're about 35 minutes in, so we're getting kind of to the end of this, but anybody else here have any questions for Jenni? I know we've dug into a lot, but any question? Nothing's too big, too small.
I have one last question for you, Jenni.
Oh, and I see that actually.
Tess has a question too.
Tess has a question too.
Great.
Go for it, Tess.
Hi, Jenni. Hey.
Hi.
So I'm wondering if you have any tips for remaining mindful when one is stuck in a project that perhaps 4 months ago when we signed the contract was serving our needs then and there, but right now really isn't. And we have to see it through, but for God's sake, I don't want to, I can't, this isn't serving me right now. Like, how do you deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, it sucks. I've been there. Everybody I know has been there. The frustration is real. So in a coaching session, I would ask you a few questions. Like, one is interrogating that idea of, do you have to stay? And like, what makes you think that? Like, what is the evidence to suggest that you have to stay? What is the evidence to suggest that you don't have to stay? And we work with that a little to make sure that you do have to stay stuck in it. If the answer is yes, Then it's a question of like, how are you going to feel good about the rest of the time there? What boundaries do you need to set so you can get your needs met during that final month or whatever it is? So sometimes I work with clients who the realization is that like the tax of staying for that extra month is actually not worth it, because it has such a drag factor in your business. So you get another freelancer and they step in for you and you leave and you risk making someone upset. That is option number one. But I do think there's this question of like, okay, so what do I need to get through the next month or however long it is? Sometimes the answer is distraction. I was pregnant and horribly sick. And finally, my therapist said to me, you know what, Jenni, there's a lot of value in just distraction. And I think we're taught that distraction is like running away from the sensation. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes also it's necessary if something is really bad. So, and then I always want you to have something in the mix that does feel good. So it's not just like you're not just tunnel visioned on this tough thing, that it feels like there's like a future because when we're in survival mode, it's hard to see the future. So we talk a lot about what's coming and then how can you start to move towards that right now so you feel like there's momentum for the exit. So that's what I would say. It's like someone told me the other day too, this type of thing widens your window of tolerance. So while it's uncomfortable, it does mean that you're going to be able to tolerate a lot more in the future. And that is really a silver lining, for better or for worse. So I don't know if that answers your question quite. I mean, it's just solidarity because it sucks, but
It does. Yeah.
there are mental things I think that you can do to sort of work through, like, where do you have control here is basically the question I'm asking you, right? Where do you have agency and what could you do about it?
Yeah. I feel like I've been so conditioned to just like tough it out, from being an athlete or just, a hard worker in school, that's just like the mode I enter in. And then even when the project or the thing that isn't serving me is done and over, I just sort of am, I'm crushed by it. So it's all about, I guess, sort of like control. Yeah. Like you said, sort of like thinking towards where I'm going and working to put that into action.
Yeah. And if your body and brain are used to the suffering mentality, then like that is a slow process of unlearning that like, maybe you don't have to suffer. What? Like what a concept. There's a great podcast called Quitted that's all about people quitting things that I find incredibly liberating because like quitting can be incredible. I've worked with a lot of people who have fired clients, left things, and it is the absolute best thing they ever did. And someone is mad at them also because they left. And that's hard to tolerate, but also it released them from a structure in their business that was actually holding them back. It's kind of locking them in. So yeah, like my thought experiment for you is like, what would happen if you did leave? Like do a little reflecting on that, right? Like what would that look like? What would that feel like? What would happen? Let your brain like touch it a little, see what happens.
I remember on the same note, the first time that Andrea and I had to break up with a client in our business it was daunting. It was a really big project. It was actually people that we really liked, but we were just really unaligned on direction. And there was a lack of focus. There was a lack of feedback that was being given to us. Like we just got really, really off track and we could not do the project. And at this time, we actually didn't have a termination clause in our contract, which that's another mishap that we learned from that we included. But I remember how hard it was, Andrea and I, we really agonized over it, right? We had lots of phone calls with one another being like, how are we going to do this? What are we going to say? How do we maintain these relationships? But at the end of it, we're like, we're going to actually lose these relationships if we keep pushing forward with this project and charging them and nobody's happy with the outcome. Like the only way to actually maintain these connections and make this work for everyone is to, sever this relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Tess, I'm thinking about, I fired a client a few months ago and I literally walked outside afterward and threw up. Like, I'm not saying that this is pleasant, right? Like it's tremendously difficult and you can still do it. It's like both. And it was a misalignment. It's like what Sam said, I loved the person, but the project was absolutely wrong for me. It would have taken so much from me that it was not worth it. It would have taken time with my kids. It would have meant I couldn't make more money. It was all the things. And so, yeah, like these things are just so difficult. And you actually can handle them when you have a toolkit available to you in a support system that helps you manage your anxiety, that helps you rethink this. This is like coaching and therapy and all the things, right? You don't just want to cut ties and then flounder around alone. You need people around you, but it's also like liberating as much as it is miserable. So yeah, Sam, I feel that deeply. Like you have to leave to maintain the relationship.
Totally.
Yeah.
Andrea, did you have one more question before
I did, because you touched on this a little bit in your interview, and just any like tools and apps and small little things that you use to help remind you and bring you back to mindfulness in your day?
Yeah, great question. There are a few podcasts I love that are one's called Pulling the Thread, that's very like philosophical and kind of reminds me of big themes. Insight Timer has been really great for me and a lot of my clients. It's a free app that has all kinds of meditation, breath work. Yoga Nidra is something I do a lot. I mentioned it like helps me go to sleep because my brain likes to ruminate on work questions. And so Yoga Nidra is a technique that is like very much brings you back into your body. I fall asleep in the middle, which is wild for someone who usually it takes an hour for me to fall asleep. So those are two key ones, I think. I have a lot of books I love, things like that, but I think Insight Timer would be the one I would offer to people. And then Pulling the Thread is like the good perspective giving thing. And honestly, like being in community with other people who are talking about this sort of style of business and work on social media, wherever you find your community, I think is something that has been so important to me. This again is like pretty counter to what a lot of those tech bros are talking about. And so you need to be surrounded by people who can support the idea that you might fire a client, right? Or something like that. You need a support system. And that to me is actually like a mindfulness tool that is so important. You need people to bring you back down and back into your space. People who love you and are cheering for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. This was such a wonderful way to spend 45 minutes. Thank you so much for your time, Jenni. And before we take off, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you and to reach out if they have any questions or want to learn more about your coaching services?
Totally. I'll drop my email or my website in here and my newsletter. I think those are the two best places, although I'm across all social media at Jenni Gritters. But my website has a list of some of those coaching offerings. Those are opening up in the fall. So you can just join my wait list and you would get information about that. And my newsletter, I talk about this every week. It's free. So pop in there. There's always reflective questions. It's like one of my favorite things I'm doing right now. It's such a creative, like generative space for me. So I love to be having those discussions in those places. What does it look like to run a business like this? Why is it hard? Like Tess, I just wrote one about firing a client, so you can go in there, read it. But yeah, I would love to have you all hanging out there. And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram and the places too. So yeah.
Great. We'll include all of this stuff in our follow-up email. And if you guys have any questions for Harlow or Samantha, myself, Maddie, feel free to reach out directly. We're on all the social channels as well. And if you have any input on these office hours sessions, please don't hesitate to reach out and give us that feedback. Thanks so much